Senator Mazie K. Hirono is the author of Heart of Fire, An Immigrant Daughter's Story. She is a graduate of the University of Hawaii and the Georgetown University Law Center. She has served in the Hawaii House of Representatives as Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor and in the U.S. House of Representatives. She became Hawaii's first female senator in 2013, winning re-election in 2018, and she serves on the Committee on the Judiciary, the Committee on Armed Services, and the Committee on Natural Resources, among others. The New York Journal of Books calls her memoir Heart of Fire, a powerful story of an immigrant family and how they held together through poverty, xenophobia, and abuse as they pursued American ideals of equality, justice, and freedom. It's such an honor for me to introduce Senator Mazie Hirono.
Aloha. I am delighted to be with all of you today. When I think about my college years, I think about the Vietnam War, which was still raging at the time, and how meeting a group of campus anti-war activists was one of the ways the trajectory of my life changed. The other was spending a summer working among Native Hawaiian young people in a community, Waimanalo, that was described as economically depressed. These two experiences converged to cause me to think about what I would do with my life that would take me outside of the counseling or social work that I had earlier contemplated. I was born in Japan, brought to this country by a very courageous mother, fleeing an abusive marriage to my father, who I never got to know because when I was 3, I was sent to live with my maternal grandparents. Being an immigrant and being poor was not something I talked about growing up in Hawaii. I was just trying to fit in. I developed a love of reading thanks to my elementary school librarian. And I read all the time while eating, washing dishes. I would prop the book up on the windowsill and during recess, you name it. And one of the books that changed my thinking was Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique, which I read in college. And up to that point, I thought after college, I would follow the expected path of marriage and motherhood. When I read her book, a light bulb literally went on in my head. And I asked myself, why should I follow the expected sexual stereotype path? And why should I expect that some guy would show up to take care of me? I mean, look what happened to my mother. So you can see that not only did I have a most courageous, risk-taking mother who changed my life by bringing me to this country as a role model, I was also primed to chart a different path for myself. I just didn't know what that path would be. My book, Heart of Fire, is a tribute to my mother. And all through the ups and downs and slings and arrows of my political path, she stood firmly by my side. And not once did she ask me, when are you going to get married? And not once did she ask me, when are you going to have children? Not that there's anything wrong with those things. I was something of a late bloomer. I was definitely not one of the cool kids in high school. It wasn't until I got to college, the first in my family to go, that I saw a world outside of my relatively sheltered life. The young people in Waimanalo facing violence, drugs, sexual assault, poverty. The anti-war activists who questioned our government and wanted to do something about the tens of thousands of young people we were sending off to die in Vietnam. I was beginning to see myself as doing something with my life outside of my comfort zone. Running for political office is not everyone's cup of tea, and I never predicted that this would be my path or how long I would persevere on this path. After serving in the state legislature for 14 years, I decided to make a big leap and run for lieutenant governor, my first statewide race. This is also the first time I heard from people telling me not to do it, that I couldn't win, that I hadn't prepared myself, and who did I think I was? One of these voices was the person who became my running mate for the governorship and lieutenant governorship. When I met with him, he said I had no name recognition, which was true, and that I wouldn't help the ticket, which he intended to lead after he won his primary. It's also one of the first times I said, after I listened to him, that's just bullshit. I persevered because I had already made up my mind to run. After 8 years as lieutenant governor, which included one re-election campaign, I decided to run for governor. And this is when the knives really came out. Not only were there powerful voices telling me not to run, including the senior US Senator from Hawaii, but there were even efforts to turn all the major unions with whom I had worked closely for years, efforts to turn them against me. I was running against a formidable, well-financed Republican opponent for governor once I made it past a hard-fought primary. My Republican opponent ultimately won. It was a devastating loss for me because I had poured my heart and soul into that race. And I had so many people who believed in me in spite of the odds. Let's face it, women are often underestimated. It was so for me when I ran for lieutenant governor, and triply so, if there's such a word, when I ran for governor. Not only are we underestimated, but we're told to our faces that we're not good enough or strong enough to lead. I venture to say that there are few women in whatever walk of life they're in who hasn't been told or felt she wasn't good enough, that they wouldn't support her. It took me a long time to get these voices out of my head and being able to tell the difference between honest assessment and put downs disguised as friendly or for your own good advice, usually unasked for. Gender bias is alive and well in our country, folks. The women I've talked with, including Hillary Clinton, know this. I find that recognizing gender bias enables us to ignore it or fight back as appropriate, especially if verbal bullying is a tactic used. One thing that gets me out of the model minority myth of Asians as being reserved, quiet, good at math people, which I'm not, is bullying. I began to use my voice to criticize President Trump as the biggest bully of them all. Speaking up like this was definitely outside of my comfort zone, but I consciously decided that I had to speak out. I speak very plainly. Sometimes I swear, because when terrible things are happening, if you're not moved to swear once in a while, you're not paying attention. As I literally went after Trump, Brett Kavanaugh, Attorney General Barr, articles began to appear calling me badass, which I didn't mind. What I minded was people saying, oh, she's finally found her voice. I always had a voice. I began to use it in a public way. Again, very much outside of my cultural and Asian upbringing of being polite, work hard, keep your head down. And there are times when we all should push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And I'm so grateful that so many young people now are doing just that. Whether for gun safety, climate change, voting rights, young people today are stepping up. They're showing up. The battles we thought we had won don't stay won. Voting rights, abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, union rights, the work is not done. I will continue to plug away. Perseverance is what's needed from all of us. I'd like to close by talking about my mother, who I said changed my life by bringing me to this country. Not very many people can say one person changed her life. My mom did that for me. My mother was married to a compulsive gambler and an alcoholic, my father. And living with him, and her in-laws, which was the custom in Japan at that time, was hellacious for my mother. They treated her like she was chattel. And she determined she had to escape. So she plotted and planned in secret to do that and to bring her children to a new country for us, for a better life. There is nothing I can do in my life that can match the difficulty, the courage that it took for my mother to do what she did with her heart of fire, some of which I think she passed on to me. Thank you so much. Aloha.